Well, benvenuti, amici. This is our second live recording of Tales from Swede Hollow that we are very imaginatively going to call More Swede Hollow Tales. Okay, I'll make a quick introduction of the cast and the crew, and then we will enter into Swede Hollow. Our tellers tonight are Gerry Hurd, his daughter Samantha Hurd, Sara Renner. My name is Nancy Sanchelli Guertin. I'll be telling one. Playing the accordion, where are you? Mark Stillman, which you've already heard. Tim Zorney, engineer, St. Paul Neighborhood Network on the video. And our host is the wonderful St. Paul Brewing, formerly known as Ham's Brewery. Now, our stories are largely based on the writing of Mike Sanchelli, my uncle. He was a former resident of the Hollow and a great lover of Swede Hollow. I've changed some of the names, not to protect the innocent or the guilty, but to protect myself, because I filled in a few gaps and I might not have got all the details right. So if you're mad at me, be mad at me, not him. But to enter into Swede Hollow of 100 years ago, we have a letter published in the Olivertown column of the St. Paul newspaper, written by retired St. Paul police detective Alvin C. Johnson, a very loving look back at the Hollow, and Sara is going to read that letter. So now we'll try, well, it's a little quieter, to enter into the magic of Swede Hollow via this wonderful letter that was published in the Olivertown column in the St. Paul paper by Detective Johnson.
I was a student at Lincoln School then. The people of Swedish descent were starting to move out of the Hollow, and the Italians were moving in, bringing their old world customs with them. Mothers of boys I chummed with always made me feel welcome, and I shared their meals. Food I had never tasted before. Spaghetti and pork neck bones, spinach and eggs baked as an omelet in a pie tin, bread baked in an outside oven. The homes were old but well kept, with religious pictures and family photographs on the walls, and also a calendar from the Italian grocery with dates printed in Italian. It was a common sight to see a man staggering down the hill with a heavy load of wood crating, which had been carried all the way from downtown. Sunday in the Hollow was a day to remember. The women dressed in their bright colors, wine flowing, music from accordions and mandolins echoing from the hills. The shouts of laughter as men played lawn bowling called bocce, and seeing on Monday the older women going to the springs, balancing tubs of laundry on their heads, going to one of the 4 springs, exchanging gossip, accompanied by much laughter as they washed their clothes by slapping them on flat rocks. Some of the men went to night school to learn English. I can remember seeing them escorting the teacher to the streetcar after classes. They were escorted by the entire class. No teacher was ever treated with more gallant old world courtesy. I'd like to mention, too, Ted the druggist, who was father confessor, doctor, and friend to the entire neighborhood, Miller the grocer, Erickson the butcher, both of whom extended credit when times were hard. McFadden's confectionery, where a soda cost a nickel, with wire chairs and tables in the back room, and Pete Larson's saloon, now Morelli's supermarket, where you were allowed to help yourself to the free lunch when you delivered the papers. There's not much point in my writing all these things, except that I hate to see the Hollow empty. Why not make it into a park for others to enjoy? Well, Detective Johnson, we know it's not empty. It's filled with memories.
The story is called She Was a Very Famous Actress. Now, class, our teacher said to us, all my classmates and me in the budding writers class, here's your assignment for next time. Imagine that you have a time-traveling telephone and you can call one person from the past. What I want to know is who you would call and what questions would you ask? I could see it on everyone's face. This is going to be the most fun assignment ever. And in 30 seconds, I had run through everyone I ever knew and decided I didn't want to do anyone from my past. I already know all that. I decided instead that I would go to my father's past because he grew up in a place that was unique and magical. A place that was loaded with fantastical and colorful characters, every single one of them worthy of my precious phone call. And I wasn't going to waste my imaginary phone call on just anyone. He grew up in Swede Hollow. I turned back the time-traveling clock about 90-plus years, and I grabbed my two buddies, memory and imagination, and off we went. Down the tunnel and into Swede Hollow. We passed the mushroom caves, the bread oven, the big bridge, the laundry, the clotheslines. I saw people milling around of all ages, people working, people playing. They didn't seem to notice me. The Hanson boys, Huntsy and Bunsy, had found a kitten ball that washed up from the storm sewer. They dried it out. They were running around the hollow looking for someone to play softball with. The little kids had found a clump of choke cherries, and they were stuffing their little mouths with those choke cherries until their teeth were brown and their throats were so dry they could hardly laugh. But they didn't offer me anything. I wonder if they can see me. Off in the distance, I heard music, and I looked over, and there was the Verdi Band. A collection of mandolins and accordions and harmonicas and band instruments, all practicing Noi Vogliam Dio for the first of Father Pioletti's feast day processions. Yes, this is where I need to be. Who am I going to choose? I sat a while looking at the creek. It was kind of quiet, and all of a sudden I heard a chicken. The chicken was clucking, flapping its feathers, pecking at the ground, and a second later, an old lady swooped that chicken up into her arms and stroked its little feathers, and in a cracked old voice that must have been lovely once, I heard her say, "Oh, my little sweetheart, you have to stay in the yard. I love you, but you might find yourself in someone else's soup. And that would break my heart." And with that, she and the chicken disappeared into a little two-room shack very close to the creek. There's my phone call, old Lady Margaret. She was wearing a pink and black, kind of a flapper-style dress that also must have been lovely once, but now silky, kind of faded, not so nice anymore. On her feet, old brown boots, and her hair, well, her hair was a halo of frizzled gray hair, kind of like a dandelion gone to seed. Now, no one knew how old Margaret was, but she had all the qualities of the old crone. She was old, she was poor, she was skinny, she was tattered, but she was also eccentric and mysterious. She mostly kept to herself, but she loved those chickens. They were free to roost wherever they wanted in that little house, on the windowsill, on the bed, on the floor, on the table. She didn't care. These were her best pals. Now, it's anybody's guess how Margaret ever wound up in Swede Hollow. Who knows? But I'm sorry, I'm thinking ahead. It's anyone's guess how she wound up in Swede Hollow. But I knew one thing. I had a few questions for her. Now, the creek was the lifeblood of Swede Hollow, but water has a mind of its own. And so, every year in the spring, it would overflow its banks. Most of the time, this was just a nuisance, but one year, after a very, very snowy winter and a turbulent and wet spring, that creek seemed to rise fast and high at a very fast pace. And what had been just a stream going through the hollow now was becoming rushing water, and it was high, and it was tumbling over the rocks, and it was getting higher and higher. The people in Swede Hollow were holding their breath and praying that the water would recede, but still it kept getting higher, and one day it just burst over its banks and rushed with speed and force down through the hollow, taking everything it could get with it. People who had so little watched as everything went by. Fences, trees, toys, tools, outhouses, a still, everything that they had worked for went by. The little kids saw a bicycle, the one bicycle they all shared, swiftly disappearing down the creek. A couple of them tried to grab it, or swiftly grabbed back by their parents, who knew what was really important. They stood on the dry ground as best they could and watched it all go by, kind of with a sad, resigned feeling. And then they heard a creaking, a loud creaking, and they realized that the big bridge was starting to sway, swaying back and forth, loud creaking. And then little Mike Sanchelli yelled, "Old Lady Margaret's kitchen is floating down the creek!" And sure enough, the river had grabbed a piece of that little house, and down it came. Everyone's mouth was wide open, wondering what to do. Should we scream? What can we do that will stop this? What stopped it was the bridge. Down it went, and it hooked on something, who knows what, a tree or something, and hung up on that bridge perilously while the bridge was swaying back and forth. Someone else yelled, "Save the chickens!" And sure enough, there were 3 chickens, first one, then a second, then a third, jumping up out of that house, trying to get a perch onto something above that water, clucking away, feathers going, terrified. Well, that was their call to action. Old Lady Margaret might be strange. She was strange, but she was their neighbor, and these chickens were her friends. The men formed a kind of a arm-in-arm human chain. Thank you. The men formed a human chain, and the strongest of them waded into the water and held the bridge support as best they could to stop that swaying. The boys, young boys, gingerly walked up onto that bridge, and they formed a bucket brigade. And as those chickens jumped out of that house, they'd pick up first one, pass it hand over hand, then the second one, pass it hand over hand, then the third, pass it hand over hand, until all of the chickens were safely in the arms of a frantic old lady in a pink and black dress. They got off the bridge, the men came in to the dry land, and just in the nick of time, because a second later, old Lady Margaret's house shook loose, and down it went down the creek and was never seen again. Well, the water receded, and everything went back to normal in Swede Hollow. But what happened to Margaret? Well, Tia Nicolina found her another house right by Mrs. Knutson and her little grandson, Buddy, who could keep an eye on her. And Margaret added a few other animals to her menagerie. She had a few stray dogs, some stray cats, and a rabbit. And every evening, they would sit out in their yard, companions, best friends. And when it got dark, she clapped her hands and said, "Come on, kids, we got to go in now." In a little single file line, they walked into the house where they were safe. So that is who I am going to call with my imaginary phone call. And I'm going to ask Margaret the following questions. Number 1, what was your last name? Number 2, were you really an actress? And if so, what roles did you play? Juliet? Lady Macbeth? Or maybe you were just a Mac-scented bathing beauty in the silence. And of course, last I would ask her, Margaret, how did you ever wind up in Swede Hollow? But I would tell her a few things too. I would thank her for being so kind to her chickens. And I would thank her for bringing a little glamour and a little mystery into lives that were so hard. And I would tell her this, Margaret, I don't know whether or not you were famous in your time, but you're a legend now. Because every time we take a walk around Swede Hollow, and your name always comes up, somebody always says, you know, she was a very famous actress. Grazie. No. Okay? I can announce it. We get all our stories from my Uncle Mike, but he comes by it naturally from his mother, Antonetta Sanchelli. A while back when I was writing a few things, I wrote down some of the funny things that she said and the way she said them. And I sent them out to these people just for our own enjoyment, and we discovered that it was pretty funny. And my cousin Gerry, the poet, wrote a poem about her as a storyteller. So we're going to have the poem, and then, well, I'll let Gerry explain it.
Thank you, Nancy. The best storyteller I ever knew was my grandmother, Antonetta Sanchelli. She drew from the finest sources: the Old Testament, Italian folklore, daily life in Swede Hollow, lives of saints, operas and soap operas, and her own imagination. Her voice was soothing yet expressive, and what made the stories uniquely hers was her wonderful broken English. Here are some examples with translation. Sit down, I'm gonna make you a little sandwich.
I'm gonna make you a little sandwich. Eating was the solution to every problem.
Okay, we're gonna have a little glass of wine.
Same thing.
Close the squeech.
Turn off the light.
Use the mapin.
Use your napkin or dish towel. Mapina, I think.
Bring me the handkerchief.
The handkerchief.
Are you kids in the mayonnaise? Do you know you're gonna get the worms?
Citrate of magnesium. Italian Alka-Seltzer in a blue bottle, brioche, fizzes in your mouth.
As kids, Grandma kept the mayonnaise in a cabinet between the kitchen and the living room. And so whenever we'd go past it, we kids would take a mouthful, and it was like Pop Rocks. We'd come out of the living room, we'd be foaming at the mouth. Nancy, you go to the store, get a big loaf of Roma bread and a panoli.
Nancy, go to the store and get a loaf of Roma bread and a pound of oleo margarine.
Also freshly freshly grated Parmesan. If I was lucky, it was grated on the ratagaz.
That's the square grater.
Now here's the dangerous part of my grandma. Here's how she cut a slice of bread from the Roma loaf. She held the loaf vertically against her body, grabbed the biggest knife she had, which was really big and kept very sharp, and she began sawing toward her body. We kids held our breath every time, certain that she would eventually saw herself in half. She just cry and pray and cry and pray.
She just cried and prayed, cried and prayed.
She said this while swaying back and forth, hands in an upright prayer position, used to describe a girl caught in a tough predicament in a story, or sometimes describing herself in a quandary, or sometimes in response to my grandfather's litany of saints, which was calling down curses on the heads of all the saints that he could think of. I go to the church.
I'm going to church.
She said that daily after slapping on her old navy blue silk hat, putting it squarely on her head. She put the hat on to go to Damiani's as well. For every day, she just wore a macadoo.
A scarf.
Okay, let's say Yamazane.
Okay, let's go home.
Now, we think this is a variation of Andiamo la cena, which is let's go have supper. Joey, go down to the Chuka Chuka, get us some chamega.
Joey, go down to the New Kin Chu and get some chow mein.
Chow mein was always a special treat. Angelina, I'm on the first step. Ma!
From our favorite story, Angeline, I'm on the first step, and the terrified little girl cries out for her mother.
Angeline was told in a very spooky voice. Though we all knew the story's happy ending, we shivered in dread every time we heard the story, which was maybe 100 times. And last, the words we love to hear the most. Once upon a time in the forest.
Once upon a time, in the forest.
And off we went to another world, a bunch of kids and their beloved grandmother.
The Storyteller. She would weave many a magical spell. Through wondrous stories she would tell, capturing the attention of awestruck children, taking them far away to an ancient kingdom or a small village on the Italian countryside. Her memories made her beam with pride. She told stories of witches, wizards, and gypsies, monsters, ogres, wild animals, and pixies. She painted beautiful landscapes with words. Her musical cadence was like singing of the birds. She spoke English with a beautiful Italian accent. The kids were certain that she was heaven sent. The yarns she could spin were always stellar. Our Grandma Do Not, the Storyteller.
And this old Italian song is in honor of her. Sing along if you like. Mamma, son tanto felice perché ritorno da te. La mia canzone ti dice che è il più bel giorno per me. Mamma, son tanto felice, viver lontano perché, mamma, solo per te la mia canzone vola. Mamma, sarai con me, tu non sarai più sola. Quanto ti voglio bene, queste parole d'amore che ti sospira il mio cuore, perché Sai, con me tu non sarai più sola, quanto ti voglio bene, queste parole d'amore che ti sospira il mio cuore, forse non si usano più, oh mamma, ma la canzone ma più bella sei tu la vita, e per la vita non ti lascio mai più. Grazie Marco. Our next story is called The Robbery, and it involves us all. So all of us have to get to this little mic on cue. There may be a few little breaks. But this is called The Robbery.
On the worst day of her life, little Amelia Caruso learned that her father had died in a terrible accident at the railroad yards where he worked. Up until that day, 10-year-old Amelia and her mother and father had lived happily together in a little house in Swede Hollow, right there at the end of the tunnel. Her mother held her close. "Carissima," she said softly, "your father is gone. Now we have to do things in a different way. Mr. Miller is going to let me work afternoons at the store up the street. Some days, when you come home from school, I won't be here. Listen carefully, cara mia. If I am not here, you make yourself something to eat, then do your homework. And when it gets dark, you go into your room, maybe read a book, and wait for me. Don't open the door to anyone. If you get scared, run across the garden to Annette Sanchelli and wait for me at her house. Capisce, Amelia?" "Si, mamma," said the sad little girl.
In a little shack right next to the Caruso house lived a young man named Pete Swanson. Now, Pete was one of those guys, and we all know at least one, who spent all of his time and energy staying out of work. According to Pete, work was for chumps. He often bragged to his pool hall buddies, "If you just keep your eyes and ears open, you can make plenty of money without lifting a finger. Let the other guy do the work." One day, not long after the accident, Pete was lying around his house trying to think of a way to scare up a little cash, when he heard a curious thing. He could clearly hear a car coming down through the tunnel. Not many cars drove into Swede Hollow. He got up to check it out and was surprised to see a beautiful, sleek, black car pull right up in front of the Caruso house. Two men got out of the car, and they were both dressed in dark suits, sporty neckties, and two-tone shoes, and wearing hats, not caps. One man was carrying a large briefcase. They knocked at the door to the Caruso house, and Signora Caruso came out to greet them. After a while, they came out. The man with the briefcase set it down, and both men shook hands with Mrs. Caruso. They picked up the briefcase and waved to her and got in the car. She waved back, dabbing at her eyes with her apron. They drove off. Pete thought, scratching his chin. What was that all about? Two dandies and a briefcase, here in Swede Hollow. Pete didn't know much about his neighbors or about money or about anything really, but he knew who did, the women of Swede Hollow. Go to where they gathered to work and just listen in. He grabbed his cap and headed down to the bread oven where he found Mary Barilla and Dora Menacchio, two sisters busily baking bread and chattering away. He circled in as close as he dared and heard these snippets of the conversation.
Oh, poor Teresa Caruso. What's she going to do now she loses her husband? How's she going to put food on the table?
No husband, thought Pete. What happened? Almost as if they heard his thoughts, they obliged.
Didn't you hear? Mary said in a conspiratorial whisper. The railroad gonna give her some money.
Money? How much? But his luck ran out. The bread was baked, and the two women busily pulling it out of the oven, leaving all thoughts of the Caruso fortune to Pete. He needed to know more. He quickly rounded the path and walked up to the clothesline where he hit pay dirt. There they were, the Gomares, they were called. 3 old birds that ran everything in the hollow, led by their leader, Tia Nicolina. And those hens were a-clucking. He could hardly keep up.
Nicolina, her hands in prayer, lamented that poor Signora Caruso lost his life just trying to do his job. But, she said, the railroad gonna give her some money. Then she whispered in amazement, $4,000.
The railroad is gonna give Teresa $4,000?
See, she told me. 2 guys came to her house in a big car.
Madonna mia! $4,000! What is she gonna do with the money?
Pete thought they must have brought the money in the briefcase. The women continued talking, but from that point on, all Pete could hear was $4,000. His troubles were over. He just needed to get his hands on that money. He ran up to the street and ducked into the pool hall. Anybody seen Mick? He shouted, trying hard to keep the excitement out of his voice. He's up at the brewery looking for a job, someone answered. And Pete was off. He found Mick in a long line of applicants, and to Mick's annoyance, Pete grabbed him and pulled him aside. Keeping his voice low, Pete explained to the Caruso situation, and then quieter still, how the two of them were going to be rich men because of it. So, he whispered, in conclusion, here's the plan. You come to my house tonight, wear the darkest clothes you have, and bring a big sack. The old lady goes to work in the afternoon, so as soon as it starts to get dark, we go in and take the money. That's as simple as that. Simple, of course, to anyone who knew as little about money as Pete and Mick. Pete had no idea what $4,000 looked like or where anyone would keep $4,000. He figured that it just sat in piles on the floor, and Signora Caruso took the bills off the top of the stack as she needed them. For his part, Mick had always regarded Pete as the brains of the outfit, and without a moment's hesitation went along with the plan, such as it was. By dusk, the boys were dressed and ready to go. Mrs. Caruso had left for work, and the hollow was almost dark, and Pete, keeping watch at the window, declared that the coast was clear. Let's go, he ordered in a kind of a whispered shout.
They crept across the yards and pushed through the locked door. Amelia, studying in her room, heard the door give way. Her heart lurched in her throat, but she remembered her mother's instructions. She quietly dimmed the little kerosene light, moved into a corner of the room close to the window, and listened. She heard footsteps and furniture being tossed to the floor, and then the sound of angry whispers.
Where's the money? One voice demanded. It must be in another room. You check the kitchen, I'll take the closet.
More footsteps, more furniture crashing to the floor, dishes breaking. The boys started to argue.
Where's the money? I thought this was going to be simple. Well, how should I know where the old bat's keeping it?
And so on. Under the cover of their angry, loud whispers, Amelia quietly slid the window open just enough for her small body to slip through it and ran as fast as her legs would carry her across the garden and into the Sanchelli's yard. Tears streaming down her face, she threw her arms around Antonetta, who was talking across the fence with her neighbor, Maria DeLoya. "Signora," the breathless little girl began, "two guys broke into our house. They're looking for money."
What? Who? The women asked, incredulous. Poor Teresa, Maria cried. She don't got enough trouble. Now she got to worry about someone stealing her money and scaring her bambina. Well, they're not going to get away with it, whoever they are. And with that, Maria grabbed the first weapon she could lay her hands on, which just happened to be an 18-inch chunk of a 2x4, and headed for the Caruso house. 4 feet 10 inches of righteous indignation, wielding the 2x4 of vengeance. She flung that door open, the weapon raised over her head and ready to strike. To her amazement and fury, there she saw Pete and Mick ransacking that house. Broken furniture lay everywhere, dishes and papers and clothing strewn all over the floor. "Pete Swanson, you are a bad boy," she yelled, and she swung that 2x4. On the downstroke, she got Pete right across the back of the knees and sent him sprawling. And on the upswing, she got Mick on the back of the shoulder blades and sent him sprawling. And they tried to scramble up, but she kept raining down blow after blow. Up they'd come, down they'd go, till finally they were able to scramble for the door. Out they went. She chased them right out with the 2x4, and they ran right straight into the arms of 2 St. Paul policemen. Still, she kept swinging that weapon until she heard Antonetta yell, "Basta, basta, Maria, stop! You're going to kill them. Then the policeman can't take them to jail." That stopped her in mid-swing. Those boys were going to jail, right where they belonged. She had to think about it for just a second. Then with a sigh, she lowered the 2x4. All was quiet for a moment until they heard the little girl cry, "Mama!" and looked up to see Teresa Caruso running down through the tunnel, gathering her precious Amelia into her arms. The policeman handcuffed the 2 boys, now relieved to be safe from that crazy woman, and started to lead them away when Pete turned around and said,
Signora Caruso, I have to know, where's the money?
"Oh, Pete Swanson, you silly boy," said Teresa Caruso. "The money is in Mr. Speranza's bank, so nobody can steal it."
Epilogue. Pete Swanson never did make the big score. Never did find his fortune right around the corner, but spent his life trying. Mick did his time, then got back into the employment line at the brewery. Whenever he was tempted to stray from the straight and narrow path, he thought of Maria DeLoya and her 2x4 and headed right back to work. Signora Caruso and Amelia moved up on the street, and in Swede Hollow, everything went back to normal.
I'll tell you where he was headed. Funicula. Okay, it's sing-along time. And we're somewhere on that song sheet are the words to Oi Marie, the chorus. We'll give you a very, very rough translation as we go.
Psst, Maria, open your window.
Come faccia Maria?
I'm down here, beneath your window.
Castongo miejca via.
Don't be so contrary.
Sperruto pavede.
I just want to see you.
Non trovo un'ora pace.
I can't get any peace.
Notte faccia giorno.
All night, all day.
Sempre pestaca attorno.
I toss and turn, toss and turn.
Sperrano ci parla.
I just want to talk to you.
Oi Marie, quanto sonno che perdo per te. Fammi dormire, abbracciato un poco con te. Oi Marie, quanto sonno che perdo per te. Fammi dormire, oi Marie. Oh, Antonio, you need to find another girlfriend. You can't sleep? What about me? Oh, Antonio, please find another girl to torment. By the way, you're not a very good singer. Oi Marie, quanto sonno che perdo per te. Fammi dormire, abbracciato un poco con te. Oi Marie, quanto sonno che perdo per te. Fammi dormire, oi Marie. Well, are we good or what? Okay, just a little word of warning. Not long before my father died, we were going through a lot of these stories, not because he thought he was going to die, just because he liked to tell them. And he said, you can't do just the funny ones. Some of these stories are sad. These are real people. They had real lives. Things happened. So we're going to take just a little gentle walk down that path with these next couple stories. The first is called Superstition.
Father Anonymous sat alone in the last pew in St. Ambrose Church, not praying, only thinking, questioning. The church was blessedly quiet and dark on this sweltering afternoon, and he had earned a rest. But even with his eyes closed, he could not escape this day. He was a busy man, not able to spend much time in meditation or reflection. And he was not by nature overly inclined to introspection. But on this day and on so many others, he asked himself again and again, what am I doing here? Here was Swede Hollow, a tiny isolated refuge for struggling immigrants on the east side of St. Paul, Minnesota, USA. Home to a mixed collection of Italians, a few Mexican families, and a smattering of Swedes left over from an earlier wave of migration. What he was doing, or what he was sent to do, was to be their pastor, their spiritual guide. Lofty goals for a shepherd so different from his flock. He had been born into a family of means and influence in Torino, ancient and elegant metropolis, jewel of the north of Italy. Educated, refined, and cultured, he was a most promising young priest. On my way to Rome, he may have said it out loud, and then hastened to add, se voglio Dio, if you want God. Well, apparently the Lord did not wish it so, and he was assigned to a mission church in the U.S., to a congregation of Italians from everywhere but the north, Abruzzo, Campania, Calabria, Toscana, Puglia, even Sicily, divided by their vastly different dialects, and Sicilian was incomprehensible, united by the shared poverty, faith, and hope, and every one of them clinging to their many beloved superstitions. And he railed at them from the pulpit, both in Italian and English. You must trust only in God. You must pray only to God and to his Son and to his Blessed Mother. The worship of other gods is evil, and these unholy rituals will bring you to everlasting damnation. Gesù, Giuseppe, e Maria, he would call out, and they would answer fervently and automatically,
Now and forever.
thank you. Now, how much forcefully could he say it? And there were still signs everywhere. The horseshoe over the door, the broom across the window, scissors under the pillow. Who were they so afraid of? La Streghe, the witch? Or the Malacchio, the evil eye? My God, he thought, you can't even compliment a mother on her beautiful baby before someone yells, Benedica, lest the compliment be only a trick to cover a curse. Garlic, crosses, oil and water, the Italian horn, all used in fear and ignorance by the people he knew to be faithful and devoted to God. How could he stop them? Today he realized he could not. This day, because of his authority as a Catholic priest, it was hoped he could persuade the heartbroken young Mexican senora to release the body of her infant son to the health department. Grief-stricken, unable to comprehend the death of yet another child, Senora had dressed the baby for bed, laid his tiny body on the small table, and covered him with a gauzy tent. Sitting next to the child she prayed was sleeping. She cried and cried. Time passed. The boy did not awaken. The health department declared his removal a matter of public safety, and they meant to collect the tiny remains today. Couldn't they find a Mexican priest to speak to the senora, he had asked? Maybe hearing her own language could bring her some solace, some assurance, some understanding. But the answer was no. There wasn't time. He did his best in English and Italian and in his very limited Spanish. But what could he say that would comfort her? How could he convince her that this had to be? How could she or he or anyone ever understand how a good and loving God could permit this suffering? In the end, the women of Swede Hollow came to the rescue. Every one of them had been through this more than once. They knew her grief as no one else could, and she trusted them. They enfolded her and cried with her and made sure that her precious child was laid to rest with care and with gentleness. Father arose from the pew. He couldn't spend all day thinking. He had to get back down to the hollow. He overheard the altar boys talking about going to the Bible camp with the Union Gospel Mission, and he planned to stop it. These are Catholics, not holy rollers, he said aloud, gathering steam. It was just getting dark as he entered the hollow through the tunnel. Families were in and getting ready for bed. He saw Senora Maria, getting her little ones in, and noticed a broom placed across the bedroom window. Maria, cos'è questo? What is this? This is evil. You must trust only in God. And with a little force, she took it out of his hands and replaced it across the windowsill. Padre, she said, I got 9 kids. I can't take any chances. See, Maria, he said with a sigh of resignation. Maybe she was right.
Okay, we have another selection from Mark. Well, we have one more story and a poem and a song. The night is so young. Our next story has a title. It also has two parts. I don't want to tell you the title because it really wrecks the story. So we will just call this Part 1, The Car.
For all the jokes about mobbed-up Italians and gangsters and made guys and mafioso, most little Italian kids really knew nothing about this part of the Italian-American experience until television brought us The Untouchables, which introduced us to Al Capone and Frank Nitti and all the other black hats. Along with that, we learned about something called Prohibition and its players, the bootleggers. In Swede Hollow, before, during, and after Prohibition, most families made their own wine, and some also distilled a little whiskey. This was mainly for home consumption. They were generally not bothered by authorities except for occasional raids by the Irish police, busting up stills just to keep in practice. As for the mob, the Black Hand as they were known, they were not interested in these home operations as long as they stayed below the radar. There was, however, money to be made from the sale of illegal liquor. Every now and then someone would try to expand his business beyond the neighborhood, but catching the eye of the bootleggers was a very dangerous game. One summer, two little boys, Joey and Sammy, that's Joey Sanchelli and Sammy DeLoya, were playing in the dirt down by the entrance to the tunnel. They were busy building a road with hills and a river and a bridge to be used by the toy cars that they had found in the binder dump. So intense was their concentration that they did not hear or even notice a car coming down through the tunnel. They looked up in amazement when a splendid big black car stopped right in front of them. This was the kind of car little boys dream about. It was sleek, painted a shiny black, with white wall tires and running boards. 2 large round headlights were wrapped in silver chrome, and on the top was a big shiny horn. On the hood, on the hood, a figure of a man shooting an arrow. The boys could not take the eyes off this car. 2 men got out of the car. They wore sharp black suits with white pinstripes and big ties, fancy shoes with the kind of thin socks that nobody would wear if they wanted to keep their feet warm. And on their heads were hats, not caps, real fedoras. They snarled at the little boys. "Where does Venezia live?" one of the men demanded. "Venezia? Ah," the boys said, confused. "Oh, you must be looking for bananas." The boys liked bananas. They thought he must be pretty important if he had friends with these 2 swells. "He lives up there on the hillside." They pointed to the house and then quickly turned back to the car. The men started walking up the hill, and then one of them swung around just as the little boys were about to run their hands over the shiny fenders. "You 2 mugs, keep your grimy mitts off the car." The boys' hands flew back, but they continued to circle the car, lost in its beauty and power, until they heard a loud pow, pow, pow. They turned in the direction of the noise, and they were amazed to see the 2 dandies running down the hill just as fast as their 2-toned shoes would take them, knees up, ties flapping, and holding onto their fedoras for all they were worth. Behind them, Bananas was shooting into the air and shaking his fist. "You get away from my house," he shouted, and raised his gun to his shoulder, ready to fire again. The 2 men jumped into the car, jerked it around 180 degrees, and with tires squealing, sped off through the tunnel. Mr. Venezia dropped his arms to his sides. He calmed down and caught his breath. Then he slowly walked back to his house, head down. The boys did not say a word, but after a short time they followed. When they got to his house, they looked in the window. They saw a man they liked, a man they called friend, sadly packing his clothes into a suitcase. He patted his dog on the head, and they heard him say, "Lila, I won the battle, but I lost the war. I have to leave Swede Hollow." He walked out the door and down the path to the home of Tia Nicolina to see about selling his house. $20 should be enough to get him safely out of town.
Part 2, the shoe. Now you might think that Mr. Venezia's bad luck is a very poor way to end a story, and you would be right. But that's because this isn't the end of the story. To end it, we have to go back about a week in time to another story about luck. Early one morning, Signora Angela Rosa ran down the path to the binder dump just as fast as her chubby old legs would carry her. She was trying to get to the binder dump before Pegleg. Pegleg was the one-legged, self-appointed guardian of the binder dump. He claimed that he lost his leg working on a whaling ship. But now he made his home in the binder dump, and he considered everything in the binder dump his, and he did not take kindly to anyone who took anything of his. And just to make his point, he had a slingshot and a bucket of nuts and bolts, and he was a dead aim. Nobody fooled around with Pegleg. Now, Angela Rosa was looking for a fairly good-sized chunk of linoleum to fix a little hole that she found where the linoleum had worn through right by her stove. And she wouldn't have bothered for herself. But it just so happened that a couple days before, she had gotten a letter from her very good friend, Annette Sanchelli. And it sounded to her like the Sanchellis might be her house guests for a while. So she really wanted to make it nice. Angela Rosa was crying now, but these were tears of joy. Now, she had to stop for a moment because she wasn't as young as she used to be. She saw a flat rock and sat down on it. And while she was there, catching her breath, resting her legs, she took the letter from Antonetta out of her pocket and reread it for about the 100th time. And this is what it said.
Carissima Angelo Rosa, we are coming home. We left St. Paul 1 year ago, a family of 8. We return a family of 7. We left in the hope that Antonio could find work and that I would recover, but we found only more sadness. Antonio went to work for the railroad, but I became even more sick and very weak. I was unable to get out of bed. I stayed in the hospital for a very long time. Our family was split apart. The older boys lived with their father and the other workers in a boxcar. The kids at school didn't like them. They were skinny and poor and dark-eyed. The Bambini, Mary, Joey, Nellie, and Perry were put in a home with strangers, neglected, never enough to eat and always cold. Our little Perry died. When St. Anthony placed my little Bambino in my arms, I knew we had to go back to St. Paul, where people knew us and loved us. I prayed to God to give me strength to care for my children. I am getting better. Tomorrow we board the train. Mikey will help me with the little ones. In 4 days and 4 nights, we will be home. Zia Nicolina is looking for a house for us. Amica mia, my friend, while we wait for a house, can we stay with you? I promise we will be quiet, we will be helpful, and we will be grateful. Antonetta.
Angela Rosa put the letter back in her pocket. Oh, how much she had missed her friend. The women in the Hollow did so much work together, baking bread, washing clothes, tending the garden, laying out the sheets for the tomatoes in the fall to make the paste and to dry them. And Antonetta's wonderful stories made the work go faster and seemed a little easier somehow. Angela Rosa particularly liked the ones about the women who were strong and courageous. Joan of Arc, leading an army of men into battle and winning. And from the Bible, Judith tricks the king, gets him over to her house, slays him, and saves her people. And then, of course, the young girl, Genuefa, abandoned by that lousy, rotten prince with her baby in the forest, left to raise her child with the help of the forest animals. These are the kind of women Angela Rosa just loved, strong and courageous, women who could get the job done. And that reminded her she had a job to do. She picked herself up, put the letter away, and walked on down to the binder dump. She got down there. She checked to see if the coast was clear, and it was. And off in the distance a little ways, she saw a kind of a rolled up piece of linoleum that just might do it. She kind of waded her way through the junk here and there, and she was just making a little inroad, and she was almost at that piece of linoleum. She pushed something, she was pushing things aside, tossing it this way, tossing that way. She picked up something, tossed it over to her left, and it tumbled right back. She picked it up, tossed it over to her right. Again, it tumbled right back. This time she picked it up and took a look at it. It was an old black shoe. She grabbed it by the heel, just ready to really wing it one and get it out of her way, when something fell out of that shoe. It was a little piece of paper. She picked it up, smoothed it out. It was kind of damp, kind of crumpled. She smoothed it out and realized that it was a $10 bill. It was kind of worn, but it was still usable. Whoa, she thought, $10. She almost yelled, but then she remembered where she was. She looked a little further at the shoe, and I'll be darned if another $10 bill didn't fall out of that shoe. Now she took a hold of the shoe and tore it to shreds, but she didn't find anything more. Still, in her hand, she had $20. What was she going to do with $20? She could think of a million ways to spend it, but of course, she couldn't. Because if anyone knew she had $20, they would accuse her of stealing it, or worse yet, they'd go steal it from her. Oh, thought Angelo Rulli, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I got $20. I can't do anything with it. Well, she thought, first things first, I'm going to take care of the money. I'm going to take care of the floor. She took the money and carefully smoothed it out, folded it up nice, and put it into her right shoe. And she went a little further and grabbed that piece of linoleum and threw it over her shoulder. And then she started to walk home. Now, she didn't want to put a lot of pressure on her right foot and make that money, make it get into even worse shape. So she kind of developed a strange walk, kind of a clump, tap, clump, tap, clump, tap, and she was swaying a little from the weight of the linoleum, so she was walking kind of like this back up to her house. And she wasn't paying a lick of attention where she was going because all she could think about was the money. And so she walked right into Zia Nicolina. Now, my Italian is terrible, but I think I'm right when I say this. Zia Nicolina was the capo de comares, the head of the godmothers. These ladies knew everything that happened in Swede Hollow. They knew everyone in Swede Hollow, and Zia Nicolina was the head of that group. She looked at Angelo Rulli and she said, Angelo Rulli, what's the matter with your foot? Angelo Rulli said, no, nothing, just a little blister, just a blister. Angelo Rulli was scared to say much. Angelo Rulli, I'm going to get Concetta Pariana over it. She's going to take a look at your foot. No, said Angelo Rulli. No, fine, tutto bene, fine and good. And she just clomped on away. Zia Nicolina looked after her for a long time and just knew something was not right. When Angelo Rulli got to her house, she quickly took the money out of that shoe, smoothed it out nice, and put it on her pillow in her bedroom to kind of dry it out. Then she started working on the floor. A second later, she heard a knock on the door. She answered the door, and there was Concetta Pariana. Concetta was the nurse healer in Swede Hollow. You didn't go to the doctor until you checked with Concetta first. She opened the door, and Concetta said, Angelo Rulli, I came to fix your foot. Angelo Rulli was terrified. Everyone confides in the nurse healer. She knew she couldn't say anything. She just said, no, fine, good, all good, and shut the door right in Concetta Pariana's face. She sat down at the table. That was a close one, she said. Well, she said, I can't trust myself. I know if I open my mouth at all, I'm going to blurt this out to somebody, and then I'm really going to be in trouble. I'm just going to have to stay home here until Antonetta comes here and she can tell me what to do with this money. And that's exactly what she did. She stayed in for the next 3 days. She'd sneak out at night to get a little water, but that was about it. Otherwise, she pretty well stayed home. And what she didn't bank on was that all the ladies in Swede Hollow worked together. And if someone's not there, they all know it. Well, they said, at the bread oven, Zia Nicolina, where's Angelo Rulli? No one's seen her for a couple of days. And this went on for a while, people talking about where she was. And finally, Zia Nicolina said, this has got to stop. This has been a couple of days. She's probably dead in her house by now. But Zia Nicolina was nobody's fool either. First thing she did was take a basket, bread, cheese, a little menestra, and then she thought, I hate to do it, but I better test for the malocchio. She took a little bottle of oil, slipped it into her apron pocket. If I have to, I'll test. Angelo Rosa's behavior was that strange. So Tia Nicolina walked up to her house, pounded on the door, and then threw the door open and walked right in. Angelo Rosa, where are you? She said. Angelo Rosa came out. Said, Tia Nicolina. She said, Tia Nicolina said, Angelo Rosa, sit down. Let me give you something to eat. Angelo Rosa said, no. She said, what's going on with you? No, nothing. All good. Tutto bene, fine and good. Tia Nicolina thought, I'd better try the gentle approach. Maybe we'll just do a little small talk. So she asked her a few questions, just told her a few things that were happening. But all she could get from her friend was, si, no. Well, Tia Nicolina said, I haven't got all day here. I'm going to have to do the direct approach. She took her friend's face into her old, hard hands, and she said, Angelo Rosa, che cosa c'è? Tu malata? What's the matter with you? Are you sick? And again, all she got, no, tutto bene. Well, thought Tia Nicolina, there's no help for it. I'm going to have to test for the Marocchio. So she went into the kitchen. She took the bottle of oil out of her pocket, and she got a little bowl with water. She thought she would just maybe hold this bowl of water, over Angelo Rosa's head, put a few drops of oil in, see what the pattern looked like, and see if anyone had put a curse on this lovely woman. Who would put a curse on Angelo Rosa? But just as she was walking through, she happened to glance into the bedroom. You know how you just kind of look around? And there on the pillow, she saw 2 pieces of paper. It just looked odd. She walked in a little further, and those beady, sharp little eyes realized what she was looking at. Those were 2 $10 bills there. She kind of had a hunch that this had something to do with the problem. So she put the oil back in her pocket. She went in and she said, Angelo Rosa, where did you get this money? And Angelo Rosa just burst. Oh, jeez. Tia Nicolina, I just went to the binder dump. I want to get some linoleum to fix the floor. I want a nice one Annette that comes with her family. I found the money in an old shoe. I didn't know what to do with it. Everybody would think I stole it, or they would take it from me. Now I just want to be rid of it. Angelo Rosa, Tia Nicolina said, while you were hiding, something big happened in Swede Hollow. Surely you heard the gun go off. But she hadn't. She said, Signore Venazio got into trouble with the bootleggers. He has to leave town. His house will be available, but he needs $20 to do it. Do you hear what I'm saying, Angelo Rosa? He needs $20. Angelo Rosa smiled for the first time in 4 days and said, Here, give it to him. Tia Nicolina took care of it that very day. And so, all's well that ends well. It was a story like Antonietta told, always happy endings. Signora Venezia got out of town in one piece. Angelo Rosa realized that she was a woman who could get the job done for her friends and for her floor. And the Sanchellis got a house, all the furniture, a dog named Lila, and a new start. And all because of an old black shoe. And everything went back to normal in Swede Hollow. You're going to take us out, right? Take us out of Swede Hollow.
I'm taking us out. Okay. The stories of Swede Hollow. For many generations, the immigrants came, perhaps seeking fortune or maybe fame. They journeyed far across the sea to find America where they could be free. Some settled in Swede Hollow on St. Paul's east side, working hard to build a new life with pride. Swedes, Italian, Hispanics, and others, they learned to live together as sisters and brothers. They struggled mightily and made do with little. Their existence was meager, their security brittle. They shared resources to stay alive. They relied on each other just to survive. There was no running water, no indoor plumbing, and in the winter, the cold was numbing. They built a thriving, vibrant community on a foundation of fellowship and unity. Immigrants who sought assimilation into the citizenship of their new nation. To their children, they stressed civility and the value of personal responsibility, as well as an education to achieve success. They would not accept anything less. Swede Hollow was never a paradise, but they were grateful and didn't think twice about materialism because they were free in this great place of opportunity. America is greater because they came to it and brought their strength, courage, and grit. Theirs is a history of simple, silent glories, kept alive by their many Swede Hollow stories.
The poet is Gerry Hurd. Before we do our last song together, which is Santa Lucia, I just want to do one more thank you to everyone. First and foremost, to the crew, or the cast, Gerry Hurd, his daughter Samantha Hurd, Sara Renner, on the accordion, Mark Stillman. We would like to thank St. Paul Neighborhood Network for being here tonight. We would like, We would like to thank St. Paul Brewing for once again hosting us. We always have so much fun here.
On that note, the fact that we are at St. Paul Brewing, most of you know this, but maybe the people listening won't. Where this is being recorded is Swede Hollow. Right behind us are the trees and the water and the ground where these stories actually occurred. And so it is we hear the ghosts around us as we tell the stories. I do also want to express thanks to Nancy, who has lovingly compiled these stories and has the courage to invite people to share in them. So Nancy Sanchelli Guertin. For the recording, Nancy, let me say it again, Nancy Sanchelli Guertin. Got it.
Our crew, I did this the last time too. Tim Zorney, the most patient man that ever lived, and our engineer. And thanks to you, this is never fun when you're just talking into a mirror. It's so much more fun when we're all together sharing these wonderful stories. And special, special, special thanks to Mike Sanchelli, my beloved uncle, for loving stories, for sharing stories, and for writing them down. Okay, we are going to do one more thing. We are going to all sing Santa Lucia, and Mark's going to play it for us. It's on your song sheet somewhere. Sul mare luccica l'astro d'argento, placido all'onda, prospero il vento. Sul mare luccica l'astro second verse. O dolce Napoli, o sol beato, ove sorridere vuol il creato. O dolce Napoli, o sol beato, ove sorridere vuol il creato. Tu sei l'impero dell'armonia, Santa Lucia, Santa Lucia. Tu sei l'impero dell'armonia, Santa Lucia, Santa Lucia. Grazie, grazie. E buonanotte. The new CD will be out soon.